From behind with a low blow, Woodrow Wilson strikes Roosevelt, stands over the chest with his puny ass arms up in the air, and he just dominated 600 pounds of former presidencies.
You could tell Mike has a wrestling background.
You
Yeah,
think?
because the dude threw on the referee shirt. That's some pro wrestling shit right
That
there.
was
Like,
where I was laughing to begin with. You took Debs out of the whole contest by making him a ref.
gentlemen, today we continue our series on contested, corrupt, and otherwise bull or wild elections. Today we are talking about the election of 1912.
Yeah, buddy.
1912's an interesting time. We're leaving the 1800s. We're heading towards World War I in a sense. What's going on in terms of the general feel of the United States at this moment? What are some of the things that are going on?
There's a lot of things happening. You've got the party divisions, the labor unrest, women's suffrage, economic inequality. You got socialism growing, the regulation of corporations, foreign policy trades, tensions, and rising nationalism. There's a lot of things being done in this time frame. So there's a lot of things to unpack in this election of 1912.
All of a sudden, people are kind of taking a look around and realizing that the conditions are looking kind of
So there's a deluge of immigration that takes place between like 1880 and 1905, 1910, and it's a new group of immigrants. So now you're talking about Eastern Europeans, you're talking about the first real contingent of American Jews coming from Russia, mostly. You got a Chinese and Japanese population entering the United States. And so there's a nativism that's churning at this time, no question about it. And the reality is you got, the robber barons, the, captains of industry, whatever, making tons of coin. And people are suffering in the midst of that. The production is massive. Like the scale of American growth is unbelievable, but the majority of people aren't experiencing that reward. So this is the height of urbanization in American history. We're not a nation of cities until this point. Everyone's gravitating towards cities for different reasons. And cities represent the ultimate representation of like haves and have-nots. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of poverty, dumbbell tenants, these huge like apartment buildings with no plumbing, a pot to in and throw out the window, and night soil where farmers come through and grab people's excrement to put in the fields. Like that's happening downtown, or I'm sorry, yeah, downtown from like the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers. Yeah, I mean, it's bad. There's some desperate people out there like we deserve more of this capitalist growth.
Do you think there's a connection to, there's a lot of different technologies. Obviously, we're allowed to print a lot quicker. Also, there's cameras. So now we could get documented footage of some of these conditions that people are living in. Do you feel like the technology movement also had a play in everyone taking a look at what's being done around the country?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I was just reading on the Jack Johnson fight when he beat Tommy Burns in Australia in 1908, and all those heavyweight fights are now recorded, and that's where a lot of the proceeds come from, beginning around that time. So the technology is huge, but the media more broadly is huge too. I mean, this is Upton Sinclair, The Jungle. This is muckraking. This is an era where you're seeing a lot of exposure of criminality and greed.
Super heated up in 1912. Where are we at temperature wise?
The political climate is tense. I mean, the Republican Party, which has evolved in so many ways since Lincoln at this point, finds itself divisive. It's personal too. Like there's a little bit of a beef and grind involved in that. Quick Taft fact: only president to be a Supreme Court justice. Um, Taft is his
That's
own
serious too. That's dope.
yeah. Taft is his own person, and although he and Teddy were like best boys, that fell apart quickly. This Republican Party is really struggling with like trying to identify with where society is. I feel like.
The nominees, the incumbent president, William Howard Taft, going into this, the Republican nominee. Uh,
Yep.
He's the presumptive Republican nominee. He's going to start some beef right now.
So he was Secretary of War, I believe, under Teddy, and he and Teddy were close friends. This isn't just like political acquaintances; they were really close friends. His 4 years were a little bit indescript to me. By the time you get to 1912, he's had 4 years of you know, a presidency that split his party, and he did something that was really specific that Teddy off. So Gifford Pinchot is the ultimate like environmentalist in this era, and Teddy appointed him as director of forestry services and also set aside all this land, which you know about. Teddy was an environmentalist president in a lot of ways. Taft's administration decides that they're going to open up some of that land for like timber and oil exploration. And then he fires Gifford Pinchot. Fires him. I mean, this is the ultimate sort of environmental genius in Teddy's boy. That Teddy off.
William Howard Taft's bigger mistakes, pissing off Theodore Roosevelt.
So yeah, he ran the gauntlet through the primary season. He took Taft's home state. He was the popular choice for the ticket. Then they get to the convention, and Taft has control of the apparatus of the party. So the Republican National Committee, the state committees that have power, influence, and money, they're in Taft's corner. I mean, a lot of people don't like Teddy from a young age. He's a grinding personality type. I mean, he stumbles into the presidency when McKinley dies, but a lot of people don't like the people love Teddy, but the infrastructure didn't necessarily love Teddy. And so they get to the convention. The people clearly want Teddy on a street level, but the apparatus doesn't. And so I believe Teddy walks out of that convention with his delegates.
Well, he was a rough rider. Theodore was, I mean, to me, he was an interesting cat. He was very adventurous. He's the first American president to ride in an airplane. He was a Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1906. He was very well known for his conservation efforts. His advocate for conservation and national parks, forests, and monuments. So there was a lot of good things that he did do.
Yeah, I mean, again, a controversial guy. They kind of like the New Yorkers told Teddy to push nationally and hopefully get on McKinley's ticket to get him out of New York. They didn't like that dude. He was the commissioner of police in New York, he's the governor of New York, but the New Yorkers really wanted him gone. And then at I think 42, the youngest ever, he stumbles into the presidency. So don't forget, he's not an old dude like when he becomes president when McKinley dies. He's young. Um, I think the people fall in love with him. He's a big barrel-chested like health enthusiast because he almost died several times in his youth. He was a real sickly child, battled survival many times. So his backstory is epic. There's no question about it. Uh, but yeah, when he comes back in 1912, it's like, oh, don't call it a comeback. Teddy's back. But what he didn't, I don't think, forecast properly was how much support Taft had within the new Republican Party at that point. Like they weren't going to rock with Teddy like he thought they would. So he sought out other allies, but both of those fools are fighting for a percentage of the vote that's only going to cost their party the potential of winning. And he's honestly a bigger trust buster than Teddy. Taft busts trusts that he feels are like purposely detrimental to the success of America. So he goes after Rockefeller, which Teddy would never do because they were close friends.
Right.
I think he goes after American tobacco too. Taft does. He busts both of those up. That pissed Teddy off too because Teddy went after trusts that were run by people he didn't like. So, so there's a lot of grime and reality in all of these stories, but yeah, there's something definitely very personal going on there with
Yeah, it
those
sounds
two.
like it.
Yeah.
We have the Democratic nomination of Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson entered the race relatively unknown, only having served of the governor of New Jersey for about a year.
Yeah, 46 rounds it took to select Wilson at the Democratic convention that year. There's a cat named Champ Clark, who I think was Speaker of the House, who probably had seemingly the odds-on favorite going into that. But yeah, Wilson is president of Princeton University. That's a lot of clout. Governor of New Jersey, Southern boy who moved into the North. My favorite Wilson quote, which really sums up a lot about Wilson. I said favorite and Wilson in the same sentence. I was born halfway between a dictionary and a Bible, and I'm never far from either one. He, he's uh he's an interesting character.
It's an interesting we're in 1912 is interesting because we now have the first emergence on a serious platform of the Socialist Party with Eugene Debs.
So it goes back to the point I was making earlier with the wave of Eastern Europeans that flood into the United States. They bring with them different political and organizational ideas, specifically socialism. The Russian Revolution is 1917, but communism's already sort of percolating. There's an anarchist wing in Europe that's very strong and vocal. And so all that's flooding in immigration into the United States in that era. And so those are ideas that were already, circulating in Europe and being dealt with, but this is the first time the United States is going to see like people radically demanding rights for workers and people. Interestingly, too, there's a gravitation of a portion of black folks towards socialism and communism in this era. The first black on a presidential ticket is in 1936, I believe, and it's the communist ticket. Yeah. Eugene Debs is a popular guy. He is the most famous, you could argue, the most famous socialist in United States history.
And he got arrested, so that'll tell you something about trying to get famous for socialism in the United States. Probably not the
No,
best idea.
no, at least not out loud. And socialism's going to trend as we move towards the 1920s and Harding and them. It's going to become more popular. Yeah, it's one of my favorite eras. I love the progressive era. It's like when people finally are like, man, can you do something for us? And then you have some, radical, brave folks that are like, yeah, this is really disproportionate and we need to do something about it. What's interesting is we always, in this day, we consider Republicans conservative. Taft is the conservative of the Republicans in that election. Teddy is the liberal of the conservatives in that election. But Wilson is a really conservative Democrat. He's in my opinion the top two, three racist presidents of all time. In fact, I'll give him number one position. And he has a conservatism that is appealing to a lot of folks that you might not think would rock with a, New Jersey governor.
You just gave Wilson the number one slot for racism. And I believe it was John Tyler
Yeah.
who joined the Confederacy after the South broke off. So please, please elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, there's any number of examples. The easiest one is
Yo, for sure, dude, for sure.
D.W. Griffith. He makes a movie called Birth of a Nation. It's based on the novel The Klansman. It's the story of how the Ku Klux Klan saved America from Reconstruction after the war. Wilson debuts it at the White House.
Wow.
He screens it at the White House with Griffith there. It becomes a hit across the country. He is a racist to the core.
Wow.
So I think that the most important question we should be asking ourselves right now is who would win in a fatal four-way fight between Woodrow Wilson, Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and throw in Eugene V. Debs. And they're going to brawl for it all. I'm going to throw some stats out there for everybody. Woodrow Wilson coming in 5'11", 180 pounds, 55 years of age. Theodore Roosevelt, 5'10", 225 pounds, 54 years of age. William Howard Taft, 5'11". Everyone's pretty close with that. 300 pounds and 54 years of age. And then Eugene V. Debs, 5'8", 150 pounds, 57 years of age. So we got them all brawling. What do we think, guys?
Based upon for my pick, based upon the background, I'm picking Theodore Roosevelt.
I'm with Tim. I mean, I think this is an easy one. Teddy will whoop their ass and then ask who's next.
Yep.
Tough dude. No question about it. I guess
right,
if it was like close confines in a closet, Taft might have a chance.
Well, because he's gonna smoke what? Yo, when you're in the same room as Taft, it's always tight.
Well, I'm saying if he gets his hands on your ass, 5'10", 300,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean,
So you know what though? You know what? And I'm a prelude to the end of this because I spent some time thinking about this, and I don't think Theodore Roosevelt's gonna win this fight, guys. He's not
okay,
gonna win it.
okay, convince
And
me.
I hate to precurse to the end of the election before we get there, but here's how I got this thing playing out. All right. With Taft and Roosevelt hating each other, those two are just gonna fight each other.
To the death.
Now, we do have Woodrow Wilson, who's a very smart guy. He's an intellectual.
Yeah, but his weakness was his physicality.
Oh yeah, that's why they're not even worried about him.
No stamina.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
he's
he's
not
still
gonna
got to
need
deal with Eugene
stamina.
Debs.
Nah. Well, yo, Debs put on a referee shirt when no one was looking, and he was like, you know what? I'm just gonna ref this one. I'm just gonna ref this one. So I got Taft getting a hold of Roosevelt. You know, Roosevelt's getting real wiggly, pops him open, gives him a couple shots. They're both physically exhausted. Taft drops to the ground, and then from behind with a low blow, Woodrow Wilson strikes Roosevelt, stands over the chest with his puny ass arms up in the air, and he just dominated 600 pounds of former presidencies.
You could tell Mike has a wrestling background.
Yeah, because the dude threw on the referee shirt. That's some pro wrestling right
That
there,
was
like.
where I was laughing to begin with. You took Debs out of the whole contest by making him a ref.
It feels nice to disagree with you gentlemen again. So let's talk about the wider world of the planet Earth. Some various different things that are going on besides the election. Start with the Titanic disaster. That is also 1912.
Yeah, I saw where.
1,500 deaths.
50, yep.
How many?
1,500.
1,500.
Wow. Yeah, there's a cat on that boat. His name is W.T. Sneed, I believe. He writes a book called The Americanization of the World. And in the end, it proves to be prescient. He's talking about America's greatest strength eventually will be all the different cultures that combine to make this new culture, the Americanization of the world. I think his name was W.T. Sneed. He dies on the Titanic.
Mm.
Yeah, Panama Canal is going to be finished in 1914. So it's at the height of its construction and about to be open just in time for a world war. Teddy punks out the Colombians and takes the Panama Canal Zone. Literally. There's this great political cartoon of Teddy walking around the Gulf of Mexico, towing all of the Caribbean nations, Central America, etc.
We got the Balkan Wars.
Mm.
Began in October of 1912. You got Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, and Bulgaria against the Ottoman Empire at that time. So, the war aimed to seize territories, weakening the Ottoman Empire. So the conflict resulted in significant territorial gains for the Balkan League, but was also the stage for regional tensions that would later contribute to World War I.
That's a good one. That's a good call.
That's where all that's going to pop off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And definitely did some damage to the sick man of Europe, the Ottomans, on the eve of that war.
Oh yeah, I mean we're right in the fall of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, so this is all jumping off the same time. You also have to our south, just quickly, there's real conflict in Mexico.
Yes.
It involves American investors in the oil industry, assassinations, dictators, chaos, and will fixate Wilson. Wilson is intent on invading Mexico, and he essentially does. But then gets distracted by a little thing called World War I and the Zimmerman Note. And you mentioned earlier, Tim, Roosevelt's Nobel Peace Prize, which he
Yeah.
gets for negotiating the Russo-Japanese War in
Yes.
1908. And Japan whooped out of Russia the first time an Asian army beat a Western army. And they took Manchuria and other possessions, and Roosevelt gives them back to Russia. And Japan is not happy about that. Along with a few other events, it will build this simmering distaste for America. What took place at that peace negotiation at the end of
That's
that
an excellent point to bring up.
Russo-Japanese War.
Yeah, and then there's just a bunch of unrest in Europe. Obviously, that's going to pop off in a couple years, but realistically, everyone's getting very nationalistic. There's a lot of nationalism going through not just Europe, but it's going down in the Middle East with the Ottoman empires and all those various different regions springing up in revolution. It is a tense time in Europe.
Dead ass. Yeah, Tim hit on that. I mean, that Balkan conflict, it's obviously out of Bosnia that the young Serbians or the Black Hand, whoever you want to give credit to, are going to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand and jump that whole thing off. But that's a cauldron that Tim was talking about. No question about it. There's a lot of proud, like micro-nationalism taking place in that region.
And who is the individual that gets to deal with all that? The winner of the 1912 presidential election is Sky's favorite president, Woodrow Wilson.
And the crowd goes wild on that one.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson.
So Woodrow Wilson wins it, but it could be more fair to say that both Taft and Roosevelt lost it. They with their own inability to communicate or come to some sort of terms, split their base in half, and Woodrow Wilson ended up emerging from the dust as the president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, he cleans house in the electoral count. In the popular vote, it was, very unimpressive.
Roosevelt ends up getting 27% of the vote, and Taft receives 23% of the vote.
Yes.
That's I don't think Roosevelt gets. You think Roosevelt's like, well, at least I beat you.
A part of him, definitely. I mean, you, Taft. I mean, definitely. I don't know. So I think Roosevelt was always running against Wilson for the progressive attention movement, voter base. This is a transitional election. Like I said, this isn't really about Democrats and Republicans in this era. This is more about whose progressive platform and ideas people believe are designed to make life better for everyone.
Yeah. And in terms of the stomp and looking at what actually matters is the electoral votes. Woodrow Wilson ended up with 435 electoral votes. Theodore Roosevelt came in second with 88 electoral votes, and Taft ended up with 8 total. So he got his ass whooped pretty hard on that one.
As
Are you
Imagine
saying
being
Deb's
the
got
president and
zero?
coming in third. You're the incumbent president and you came in third.
And so you're saying Deb's got zero?
Deb's got 0.
Yeah,
Maybe it's
he didn't
because
get
of
any
the
electoral votes.
He
exactly.
did
Get
get he
900.
did get 6% of the vote though. He got 900,000 votes, like Sky
Yeah.
said. That's
Yep.
6%. That's a bunch, man.
But it's also a statement to American history. Like we always talk about the top candidates in elections, but it's not unusual you have, 3, 4, 5 people on national presidential tickets throughout this era that represent, these cross sections of America that are like, bifurcating or moving in a different direction than the mainstream. Like they want something different.